In these next few chapters, we're going to get into an area of economics called industrial organization. And what we do here is we look at the market structures that businesses operate in. Now, if we look at a continuum, say like that, where we have the number of firms along here, this would be, well, this would be one firm. And this would be, let's say, thousands of firms, okay? So this is one, okay? And then this is, we just move along from one to some to a lot to a real lot, okay? Well, over here, if there's one firm in an industry, we call that a monopoly. A monopoly, one firm producing the entire market output. That's a monopoly. Now, monopoly can be a problem because they tend to underproduce and overcharge. It's something we'll talk more about when we get to monopoly. So we got one firm producing the entire market output. Well, over here at the other extreme, so we're going to bounce clear over on this side where we've got zillions, okay? Zillions, thousands, I don't know, just lots and lots. Very large number, okay, of firms. And they tend to be small. And they tend to be somewhat homogeneous. Very small, very large number of firms. They produce a homogeneous product. Okay, meaning you cannot distinguish the product they produce from one producer to the next. They all just produce the same stuff. It's a commodity. Now, think hard, what would be an industry that fits this description? Well, farms. Farming comes close. Now, very rigorously speaking, this is a theoretical extreme. Perfect competition is what this is called. And let me put that here. Perfect competition is when there's a very large number of firms, pretty much identical, producing identical products, no pricing power, no power over the price. They simply take what the market gives them. Okay, we call them a price taker. Okay. They're price takers. Farms comes darn close to this. Let's take the wheat farmers out in Kansas. Farmer Jones, Farmer Smith, they live next door to each other or next farm to each other. And they don't really see each other as competitors because there's so many of them. And one farmer's output decisions doesn't affect the price at all. Because one little farm is so small relative to the entire market that it's not going to have any effect on the price. So if one farmer doubles his output or goes out of business, it's not going to really do anything to the market price. So the price is set entirely by the market supply and market demand. And the farmer decides if he likes it or not, okay? That's the price that the farmer is going to get. So that is perfect competition on the far end. Now another, financial markets can approach this as well. Now this is highly large financial markets, highly organized, lots of buyers and sellers. New York Stock Exchange, for example. Very difficult to manipulate the market, though it has happened. And more now, if you've read the news lately with GameStop stock, people can get together on the internet and do some interesting things. But over the long haul, very difficult to. I mean, that's a short-term manipulation, because the product here is somewhat homogeneous. It's a rate of return. And the risk-return relationship of one stock, it looks awful lot like the risk relationship of another. I should say the adjusted risk-return. So that makes it very difficult to beat the stock market. That is, to get a higher return than the market offers. Same with farming. To get a higher return than the market offers, just isn't going to happen. Farmer can raise his price. He may just decide, look, this isn't enough. What will happen? Well, because that farmer's product is identical to the other farmer's product, no one's going to buy his output anymore. So under perfect competition, you got pretty much identical output. You've got firms that have no market power. They're price takers, and it's difficult in the case of farming, especially when you got a product that has inelastic demand. So perfect competition and inelastic demand is just tragic for farming. More about that later. Over here with monopoly, well, what are some monopolies? I didn't really talk about monopolies. Well, the one that comes to mind the most for me is public utilities. How many companies can you purchase water from? Okay, electricity from. Now I know there's lots of sellers out there that the local producer or provider of electricity can get electricity from, but I'm talking about you. How many wires are there going down the street with electricity? So these are what you call natural monopolies, in that, maybe you did with telephones, for example. There used to be several phone companies in the early days of telephone. And this is way before cell phones, right? So we to have a telephone, you had to have wires going down the street, telephone poles. And there were multiple companies with telephone poles going down the street. Think how nice a sight that is. How beautiful to see 3 or 4 sets of telephone poles going down the street. So, but what happens is one firm eventually ends up buying out the others. It drifts naturally towards one firm because it doesn't make sense to have all those telephone poles. You only need one set of telephone poles. So anyway, those are a couple examples of a monopoly. And monopoly, by the way, we in the United States at least, we don't really have unregulated monopolies in the U.S. They're either split up via antitrust laws, or if there's a reason for them to be in a monopoly, like public utilities, that makes sense. But again, the tendency of monopolies is that they're going to produce less than is socially optimal, and charge a higher price. We don't like that. There's a lot of things we like about monopoly if they behave, but they don't behave. So we regulate them. Here is an economic case for government to get involved in the economy, and it's definitely here. One of those is with market concentration, monopoly. Okay, well, if we step inside here just a little bit, if we get to where we have two 2 firms, 3 firms, 4 firms get a handful. I'm going to draw the line right here. A few large firms. Okay, that is called an oligopoly. This is big business. Oligopolies, a few large firms in the industry. It's not one, but maybe 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are oligopolies. And these are probably the most interesting ones. Well, I'll just put a few there. The U.S. auto market, for example, there's 3 large firms. Okay, they used to have a lot more market power before cars started coming in, imported. But even worldwide, there's not that many automobile companies. And the reason there's only a few is because of something called economies of scale, where a large firm can produce at a lower cost per unit than several small firms. And we'll talk about economies of scale as we go. Really interesting here, the behavior of oligopolists with each other. Here's where you've got a strong incentive to collude with each other. And oligopolies don't like to compete with each other. Frankly, they like to collude. Airlines is another example of an oligopoly. A few very large firms. And sometimes they do collude. And it's hard to catch them, too, because they're pretty good at it. But they would much rather cooperate with each other than compete with each other. And when they cooperate, they're cooperating for themselves against us, the consumer. So that's another area where government watches and to see what they're doing. Some interesting cases we'll talk about as we go along. And as we go in, on this end, I'm going to put, a large number of firms. This is called monopolistic competition. It's not perfect competition. There's not a zillion firms producing an identical product like we have here. But if we step inside here, we've got a large number of firms. So it's not an oligopoly. Oligopoly is a few firms, and the oligopoly can produce a differentiated product or an identical product. Okay, an example of an oligopoly also would be OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. They produce a pretty much homogeneous product, oil. And I think there's, I forgot the number of countries, 9, 10, or 11 countries in OPEC. And they collude. They're outside the U.S., and believe me, they do collude to cut production and raise prices. More about them later. But here we've got a large number of firms, lots of them. And it's kind of like a monopoly in that they produce a differentiated product. The product they produce is different from each other, but it's not that different, okay? So it's and it's like competition because there's a lot of firms. So we call that monopolistic competition. They're kind of like a monopoly. Burger King, for example, they're the only ones that make the Whopper. The only ones. They have a monopoly over Whoppers. But do you know what? If they raise the price too high, people are going to go get the Big Mac instead. Okay, or a Taco Bell, or a pizza, or whatever. There's a lot of different burgers out there, lots of different fast food, lots of different ways to put the salt and pepper on there and the sauces. So yes, they have a monopoly over their particular recipe, but again, it's not that different that they can rule over us the way a monopoly of an essential good like water could. So monopolistic competition, we see a lot of that out there. Retail stores, a great example. Fast food, other retail stores where the product is very similar, but they might differentiate themselves in areas of easy financing, friendly salespeople, knowledgeable salespeople, easy returns. A lot of the advertising we see on TV is attempts to differentiate from their competition. Hey, we're smarter, we're better looking, we're more charming than our competition. Come over to our place and we'll take good care of you, even though there's a zillion other firms saying the same thing. So here we go. We're first going to start out. We're first going to start out looking at the cost of production and defining economic profit from accounting profit, and looking at various types of costs, where the fixed costs, variable costs, and average total costs, and average variable costs, and marginal costs. Okay, you're gonna drown in all that, and that's got a whole separate chapter. And then we're gonna go into perfect competition. Even though this is a theoretical extreme, it helps us explain a lot of things. There's a lot of things out there that's very close to this, or at least close enough to it that it has a lot of explanatory power. So we'll first spend some time in here. Then we're going to bounce clear over here to monopoly and take a look at the opposite extreme. And then we're going to kind of cover these two together at the very end, and focusing on oligopoly. And there we use a little different model. We're going to be using something called a payoff matrix, which is part of game theory. And that should close out industrial organization. So we'll be in this thing for the next little while. So we'll see you with the cost of production.